Call this meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, public hearing, regular meeting of Wednesday, January 25th to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Secretary, read the roll. Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Clancy?
Here.
Commissioner Linear?
Here.
Commissioner Kane?
Here.
Commissioner Zero? Commissioner Sobieski?
Here.
Commissioner Vitalica? Commissioner Janbury?
Okay. Bobby's called me. He's held up at work, so I don't think he's coming tonight. Approval of the agenda. We have some changes to the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I suggest we delete approval of minutes because they're not ready for approval. I suggest we delete under new business item C, open space grant. The grant was rescinded, or preparation of the grant was rescinded. And I suggest we move the communications item, item A, to the beginning of the agenda, to just before remarks by commissioners, so that the proponents of that can speak before the end of the evening.
Yeah, I would recommend that we make that change. The people are here to make the presentation, and I don't want them to have to stay until late into the meeting when they don't have to. Okay, the next item is public participation. Anyone from the public? Okay, we'll go into the letter from the Newington Open Space Committee regarding open space zone. I see people from the committee here. If someone wants to come forward, or all three of you want to come forward and tell us what you're doing and how we proceed after you give your presentation.
Well, good evening, commissioners. Thank you for switching your agenda around to let us present this to you. What you have before you, submitted by the Open Space Committee, is an open space, a proposed open space zone regulation. And the Open Space Committee feels this is important. As our cover letter states, the principal purpose of this zoning district is to preserve, conserve, and protect the native and man-made open space and recreation areas throughout the town. And I'd like to stress that the open space zoning district shall be applied only to land dedicated to or owned by the local, state, or federal government. It's in reviewing the zoning regulations and reviewing the map of open space, it's become obvious that there are some questionable zoning on some of the open land, particularly in Mill Pond Park. I noticed that there are some residential R12 zones in the park on the formerly known Marquap parcel, the 28 acres on Cedar Mountain. That is zoned for public land, and there's residential on there also. And we want to make sure that these parcels are protected as open space. I think we all have the same focus in common, that we want to preserve Newington in its capacity right now and not build any more than we have to. And I know that you work very hard on that yourself on this commission. So we thank you for considering this regulation and are willing to answer any questions.
Carol, you want to add anything?
They can ask questions first.
Gail, you also want to add anything to it?
I just think, it was important that there was unity on the open space committee for this. We all worked collaboratively on it. And
I'll open it up to the commission if you have questions for the subcommittee, the committee, open space committee. Anyone understand anything?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move this as forward as possible, because we know we do have some issues with some open space that has other underlying zones. I think Commissioner Payne and I and the other members here have discussed this before. So I'd like to get this on, try to fast track it if possible.
Anything? Chris? Dominic?
I have a couple concerns. I'm totally in favor of trying to protect the open space as best we can. One of the problems I noticed is on the proposed regulations, 3.2, it says development on the site is strictly limited to small recreational facilities, recreational structures. I can see that being a problem. What will be small? So that's one concern.
Well,
The other,
do you want me to
You wanna
answer?
answer?
go ahead.
Oh, on some of the sites, there are just public restrooms already there, or structures, small sheds, that type of thing, to keep equipment to maintain the grounds, that kind of thing. I don't think anything
We gotta,
beyond
maybe
that.
we should define better than.
On Indian Hill, there's 4 big buildings, okay? Those are major structures. You have Indian Hill down here as open space. You also have ancient burial ground. I don't understand how that is open space. It's a historical site, but I don't know how that could be open space.
Where is that ancient burial? Is that the one on Church Street?
No, that's
Where, in the center of town?
It's in the center of town.
center of town.
We wanted to make sure, as it says in here, any golf courses, cemeteries, and burial grounds. Some people might call it a cemetery. It's considered open space. In my broader term, I know that.
When you look at, even West Hill Cemetery,
Mhm.
people walk there, people ride their bikes, it's, people go to meditate, sometimes, so I just feel that if the uses, besides the burial, obviously, are considered as what we say passive recreation, meditation, individual use as well.
Okay, if I could continue, there's, I'm not sure how you would be able to put this, I could see how you could put this requirement on town-owned land, but how would you get it on state-owned or federal-owned land? It'd be impossible, probably. So that would be a concern. And my biggest concern, I ran into the town attorney, because the town of Newington is exempt from its regulations, this holds absolutely no weight at all, 0. It's meaningless because a future town council, future town manager could make any changes they wanted. So this doesn't do anything, in my judgment, to protect open space. The best method is and I know we're waiting for the town planner to give us the deeds, is if these properties have deed restrictions, then it works. But even with a deed restriction, if the town of Newington owns something with a deed restriction, it could change its deed restrictions, okay? It could change it. There's nothing that stops the town of Newington from changing it. The only thing that would stop it would be if the land was bought with either state or federal money for open space, then you could not change anything on the deed restrictions.
Okay, I would like to address that. First of all, we have the town, who did this? Mike did this?
Yes, Mike collected them.
Okay, and I have one for each, so you take one and pass it around. For some of the deeds, Mike had extracted off the land records, he went through it and indicated if there was deed restrictions. And some of the properties have deed restrictions and some of them don't. But I want to backtrack to having the town is not subject to zoning. Even though they're not subject to zoning, it's another layer. And by making an open space zone, I think it's a feel-good. It's a feel-good for the community to know that we have land that's designated as open space. And like Mill Pond, everybody thinks of it as open space, but people don't realize that it is zoned residential. And I think if something is zoned open space, people are going to stop and think, do we really want to develop this piece of property? And if the town ever goes to sell one of these properties, whoever purchases the property is now going to be definitely subject to the open space zone. So I think at this point for the town, it's more of a feel good. Also, if
Why would the town sell any open space?
just you don't know.
We don't know.
50 years from now, we don't know. We might need to. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out. You know, always have to be the devil's advocate. Also, when you have a deed restriction, and one of the deeds, it says, I think it was Churchill Park, and it says if it's used for anything other than open space and passive recreation, then it reverts back to the heirs. You can't revoke a deed restriction. Once a deed restricts on the land records, unless the grantor then revokes it, rescinds it.
And you're correct, unless the restriction was put on by the owner of the property, which was the town. So
Right, but most of these weren't. Most of these.
So then these properties are right now protected with the deed restrictions.
Right. So why then wouldn't you say, you know what? Yeah, we do need an open space zone. Even though there's a deed restriction, it's nice to see that the town of Newington is doing something to try to preserve open space.
I understand, but you'd almost be better off with some sort of resolution with on the council level, so that future councils understand that people in the town of Newington don't want the open space taken, okay? Because this open space zone really doesn't have much of a meaning except a good feeling. That's all it is. Because future councils could say, well, you know, that's open space, but, you know, we want to put this 20,000 square foot building right here. And, you know, if it was for recreation, why would, you know, it's same thing like the Mill Pond. So
You could do another layer with the memorandum of understanding, but also do this. It just gives it another layer.
Well, a memorandum of understanding is simply, it's one step above a gentleman's agreement. There's no binding to it, whatever. It's more meaningless than a zone change. And because memorandum of understanding is between parties, so who are the parties? Us now, you now, and then 2 years from now, there's another. It doesn't work. The open space, we have, and I want to, by the list of properties that we gave you, we're not going out and acquiring. We don't even know whether anything other than this list will ever come into fruition as open space in this town. We have a list of properties who have historically and for years been used as parks. People set them aside for a reason. Prior planners, prior residents of this town wanted these particular parcels who have been there for years to be used for recreation and open space. Other communities throughout the country have recognized in their 2020 plan of conservation that making statements on being on quality of life issues is important. Okay, I don't think it's meaningless. I think taking a stand and making a statement that we believe in open space preservation, whether it can be overturned or whatever, I don't think that's meaningless. I think sometimes you have to stand up and say, we want these spaces protected. They're already on various land use maps throughout the town. Let's just make it uniform and recognize at least existing parks and places that we want to keep these as open space. We're not going out to acquire things. Let's keep what we have.
I would also like to add, you ask, why bother doing this if, they could come back and the town is exempt from this. Why not do it?
Well, we have
it's
it in
a
the
good
2020
faith
plan now. We have dedicated and managed open space. So it is delineated in our 2020 plan right now.
And
okay?
it's still
And that's
zoned
why,
residential.
No, the 2020 plan has dedicated and managed open space, and it's all dedicated. It's all listed on a map, and that's what stopped the development. That 2020 plan, which is a guide for all boards and commissions and the council, and that's what stopped. That helped stop the building on Mill Pond.
But
Well, I think it's the residents that stopped that building on Mill
That-
Pines.
It helped.
It's the residents who
understand.
wanted open space. This is going a step further to adding another layer of protection. And it's not meaningless, and it's
I'm not trying to fight you.
not frivolous.
I'm for open space, and I think it's good to protect it. I'm just saying that I think you need some sort of level on the council level, something, whether it's a resolution or whether it's you need something. I would consult with the town attorney and see what you can do on a council level. And yes,
so noted, and that will be pursued, but we still want to move forward with this.
In the 2020 plan, Mill Pond Park was identified as dedicated open space, which is why many of us came out and said, what the heck? You're going against there, because underlying that dedicated open space was, a different zoning. So if let's formalize what's in this plan. In terms of getting agreement from the council, as Bernadette said, yeah, fine, but by getting an open space zone, something different, something not PD or PL or R20 or whatever, it's putting it on land use maps in a way that's consistent and people will understand.
Anthony?
Can I just, yeah.
Hang on.
Let me just, I want to address something. I think it would have more teeth too if we brought this to the council, if we had the support of the Town Plan and Zone Commission. I think if we went and they say, well, how does TPZ feel about it? Well, there's mixed emotions because some people feel that, seeing the towns exempt, what difference does it make? I think if we have your backing, we'd be able to pass it on the council.
A few questions on it, as coming back on planning and zoning and been away from the communication that's been prior. And I knew it was when I was an alternate on P&Z, TPZ, it was brought up to try to get these parcels managed better to protect them. But explain to me how or how not the advantage, disadvantage, if let's use Indian Hill Golf Course is in an open space zone, it's 4 corners. Does this enactment that you want hinder it in the future for development of the same types facility? Because it might fail as a golf course, for instance, and then want to be a nature preserve. And with that, they may not need the 4 buildings, but they need 1 large building. And secondly, I just want to make sure that's protected so we don't choose these chunks that then can't be redeveloped within their type of use. And secondly, with all the communication that's gone on, I don't think it's something this discussion needs to be fast-tracked and voted on. I think it needs a little more understanding from all parties. So those are my 2 comments. Or a question and a comment, I guess.
Well, in attempting to answer, I would hope so. Concerning Indian Hill, I would hope it would offer an extra layer of protection, and that's what we're looking for. If it were if it didn't make it as the golf course, hopefully that's exactly what it would become, is a nature preserve, and nothing more would be done. We're trying to protect it from any type.
And using that as an example, it wouldn't, putting it in an open space zone, because it really doesn't explain in these sections like what you can do or what you can't do. Does it revert right back to what it's able to be used for now? The open space still won't supersede what it's used for. I mean, you could use, just for instance, the Churchill Park. There's talk of renovating and getting monies to fix. Well, I'd hate for that to get approved and then they want to put a bigger building on it to accommodate the park systems, but that takes away from the open space of the current park. It would kind of hurt what the Park and Rec are trying to do to make, maybe they need a bigger building which takes up open space. Is there anything that go with that, that if a person's going to take land away from a facility,
Good
better
question.
their facility,
That's a
are we going to
very
get the backlash from all the open space people?
And I'm not sure how that would be addressed
Yeah.
with the new plans. That's a very good point to bring up, and something that I wouldn't feel comfortable answering, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at. That's a very good point. Because I know those plans are changing as well. Did you have something?
I mean, the language on 3.232 could also be revised before it's approved to make it fit the 4 buildings at Indian Hill, proposed structures at Churchill or Mill, if there's a new bathhouse or whatever. I mean, if that seems to be your only sticking point, then definitely we can come up with some mutually agreeable language that would suffice TPZ as well as the Open Space Commission.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, I think that maybe revising that might help. I think everybody at the table here is all for open space. That's one of the reasons why we wanted the town council to revoke the what was it? The exemption of all regulations for the town of Newington. Unfortunately, we were afraid that if they dug into that, they would find that several of the buildings might not meet setbacks or other requirements. So that was a big sticking point there. But that's truly, if you can figure that out, that's truly the best method to protect the open space, is that the town of Newington should comply with the town of Newington's regulations. That would be the ultimate protection. And I'm all for protecting it. And if this is one layer, and hopefully maybe the council could look at other layers on the council level.
I agree.
Craig, I'm just curious, how is Indian Hill zoned? What's the underlying zone?
Residential, R20.
Okay, so that,
That's changing that to open space is huge. Yeah, I mean, what if lose it? What if? Right there. That's, I forget how many acres that is. That's a very large chunk of beautifully maintained open space right now that would be, I would think, under high demand. So, that's something, that we are very concerned about.
Some of the smaller parks that you have listed there, they were part of a larger development, and usually those things were requirements for the developer to put in a small recreation area. So it could be on maps that are already filed, plus some other restrictions.
They should be in the land records, like the Candlewick Park. It should be on the land records that describes the piece of property and says that it's supposed to be, this piece is supposed to be part of the open space subdivision regulations, that the developer dedicated this piece of property as a park. That should be on the land record. So I'd like to, we've got to see what the rest of these little parks, if there's any. He couldn't find anything?
No. To start with, I just had Mike research those 6 or 8 big ones, waiting for the commission to give us direction to go on and now look for the little ones, which we'll do.
Okay.
Okay, well, we all know the history of the Mill Pond thing. You got to remember too that was done in a really crazy way, that this commission didn't even have an opportunity to get an 824 review of that before it went to the public for a referendum. So some of that stuff was done in the dark. It ended up that the people were smart enough to say, no, we're not doing that. And thank God that they did. I'm in favor of this, because that I was the one that brought up that the underlying zones were, particularly on Mill Pond, was an R12 zone. Everybody thought it was an open space zone, but it wasn't. I said, look at the map. The map shows it as R12. And you start looking at the other ones. they're all underlying zones are mostly residential. So if the town, for some reason, sold the piece, it would revert back to the original zone. So this changing this to an open space zone, if the town did sell any of these parcels, we don't know what's going to happen, that they would be restricted to an open space. So it would hinder the town from trying to sell these pieces without going through some major legislation to make changes. So I'm in favor of this. I want to ask the planner, and then I'll get to this. If this is going to require a public hearing visit to change the zone, and who would be the applicant? Would it be the Open Space Committee?
Yeah, the Open Space Committee could be the applicant. If the Open Space Committee is the applicant, then you're stuck with all of those deadlines. But if it's your presentation, then for good or for bad, you wouldn't be bound by the 65, 45, 65-day deadlines. So just kind of a housekeeping thing. But there are pros and cons to it being your application or the committee's application.
The reason why I wanted to get this thing moving is because there's a lot of smaller parcels that I don't see listed. There's Banks Park off of Connecticut Avenue up there and stuff like that. And those, we need to define what the town owns and keep them in an open space. And I think by getting this zone set as soon as possible, or however we want to do this, it'll put this thing to bed and we can move on. I know the big debacle over Mill Pond was huge. And there's nothing that says at some point the town council could not try to build again, excuse me, into some other parcel. So by doing this and kind of restricting what can be put in there would be a safety net for us and the town. That's my opinion.
And my concern also, the piece on Cedar Mountain, formerly known as Marcap, we like to refer to it as Cedar Mountain South, the southernmost part. That's got zoning on there. That's residential. Business, is it business zoned? Is it PD? Yeah, and that's not protected at all. It's not listed in the open space plan of development, town plan of development. So that's a huge concern of mine as well.
Yeah.
I think because this is bought with DEEP money, there are some restrictions on that. But I don't know how tight they are, but you might want to look at that.
Yep, great start. I would recommend to the chairman and the other members, commissioners, that we keep this on the agenda so that you could fill us in. I think that, as Stanley was saying, maybe there's some other smaller parcels. Maybe we could put those on the list so that we have a complete list of everything that the town owns that's open space. And also maybe look at trying to revise that section for buildings and trying to figure that out. And then maybe seeing if there's something else on the council level that could be done. And then when we have everything all ready, make an application, and we should be able to, all the questions are answered, everything's done, we should be able to move it through pretty fast.
What would be the next step?
Well, there was.
You should go back to your committee and try to define 3.23.2, even if you have to expand it to start listing different things, so
more
we
specific.
Get a better idea than other than just structures and utility buildings. Actually say this, and this. I don't care if it's wordy or not, but you got to define what those structures and
individual properties
are.
Yeah. Okay.
That way, I think you clean up the whole thing. And then if you want to look at the other, if adding any other parcels, there's some other small parcels that you might want to add.
I'd be very happy to add to that list.
We would, it would be up to the commission whether they wanted to or not take this in.
I think the open space should present it to us. I don't think the timelines are going to be a problem, because they're going to already do all the work, and everybody's in favor of protecting the open space. So I don't think the timelines are going to be a problem. One concern I have that I think the open space committee should check with the town attorney is, if we make this open space zone, does it really get rid of the underlying zones or not? And that's a legal question. I don't have that answer. So I would, that's the whole crutch of the thing where we're trying to protect everything. So I would find out from the town attorney if that actually removes those underlying zones.
Well, if we're making it, that's kind of an obvious thing. If we're changing the zones
Zone.
on those pieces of property, it's a change of zone. And that's why it's requiring a public hearing and notification and everything, because we're actually changing from R12 on this piece of property to an open space zone. And these are the regulations that pertain to that open space zone. So we do this all the time. We change industrial pieces to PD pieces.
I guess you're right. Yep.
Because
You're
this
right.
That's why I've been trying to get people to stop, all due respect, Mr. Chairman, calling it the underlying zoning. There is no underlying zoning. There is the zoning.
zone. I mean, this is not an overlay. Open space is not an overlay of an open space. We want an actual zone change.
Certain parcels of property to this zone.
Right.
So we're changing from a residential R20 or R12 or whatever the zone is now, we're changing to a new zone. So I don't think that.
In theory,
All right.
the only way they'd be able to do it is we revert the process backwards
Yeah,
at
they'd
some
have
other
to-
point
yeah.
in time, which
Right.
hopefully will be met with resistance.
In this way, when you go to do the 2030 plan, you could have where your map for your open
Standard.
space, it truly is an open
Open space.
space zone, and not just, we're calling it open space like how it is now.
Exactly.
So I think it'd be more definitive to people looking at the maps.
And again, this zone change, it's not, again, none of us can predict the future. It's not gonna prohibit ever, should something happen where we have the town, once from 6 feet under, has to sell one of these parcels. But it's just gonna make people think, there's gonna be more of a deliberative process to it.
Great job.
So
We
we're
appreciate
gonna go
your
back to the
consideration.
committee, Then redefine this and then then come back to us and we'll go through what the procedure is to put the application in for a public hearing, and we'll move it along.
Mr. Chairman?
Will do. Thank
We'll
you,
keep this on the
commissioners.
agenda for next
Yeah, we're gonna keep
week,
it
so
on until
in 2 weeks. So if you have anything you want to update us, we'll have it on the agenda.
We won't have a meeting before, within that 2 weeks. I
Okay.
think we need to meet.
Why don't you tell Craig is your liaison anyway, why don't you tell him to put it on our agenda?
Whenever you're ready.
When you're ready, and then Craig will call me and we'll put it on the agenda.
That's great.
Fabulous. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay. Okay, next item on the agenda is remarks by commissioners. Any remarks? Okay, we're going to the next item is public hearings. We'll have this is a continuation. We'll have the secretary read the procedures and we'll read the application.
Order of proceedings of public hearing shall be as follows: convening by chairman, reading the notice by commission secretary or commissioner designated by the chairman to act in his stead, identification and location of the property involved by the town planner, statement of the issue to be considered by the chairman of the town planner, presentation by applicant limited to 20 minutes unless a specific extension is granted by the chair, persons wishing to speak in favor of application limited to 2 minutes per person, persons wishing to speak in opposition to the application limited to 3 minutes per person, rebuttal by the applicant limited to 5 minutes total, rebuttal by the opposition limited to 5 minutes total. During a public hearing, it should be within the discretion of the chairman whether the time limitation shall be varied slightly, provided the commission consents to any such variance. In no case shall an extension be more than 20% of the allotment indicated above, or 1 minute, whichever is graded. And it's for petition number 52-16, special permit, section 6.2.4, freestanding business sign at 2545 Berlin Turnpike, Artisan Vapors. George Emerson, owner. Image 360 Signs Now applicant. Randy Hamilton, 2434 Berlin Turnpike, Newington, Connecticut. Contact. Continued from January 11th, 2017.
The applicants here want to come forward and turn it over to the town planner for.
Well, I think where we left off at the last meeting was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, as an applicant, but there was still some confusion as to the math, the formula between your calculations and Mr. D'Amato's. And I think the other question was the status of the rear building, whether that was eligible for the additional amount of signage allowance. So those, I think, those were the two outstanding issues.
you have anything else to add to that, to your petition? Do you have any other information for the commission?
You handed out, Mike did this and for everyone, and I can clarify a couple things on here. But I have a letter is that letter also that one that George sent? Are you
The commissions do not, the commissions don't have it, so maybe you might want to read it. Sure. Excuse me, Mr. Hamilton, was that an email? If I go to my email in basket, would that be there? Might be easier for the commissioners to read it on the,
yes,
see it on the monitor?
Yes.
All right, let me do that.
It was today at 3:14.
Okay.
And it came from George, or actually from Mike to George and me and you.
Okay. This just arrived today, right? Today? Okay.
Yes.
What is this sign? Is this a revision to what you?
No, there was one of the questions and the differences that I had in my calculations versus what was on record was the channel letter sign that's on the building is 2 feet by 10 feet. And that's 20 square feet. And for some reason, it was listed as 26 on the signage total that was used. So that is a correction that would enter into the reconciliation. If you look at this chart that everyone has here while he's looking for his the letter, the middle column of that chart, it says signage total town, 80 for mattress firm front, 80 for mattress firm pylon, 26 for artisan front. That document is the signage that was sent in with the permit, and that's what was made. It's 20 square feet, so that's a correction on the town's end. And I thought Mike went out and measured the signs, but I'm not sure if he checked that one. The next one down is the military. It says military front, but it's really military side, and that says 32. He has front on that twice, or he's got them reversed, and the military front is the 40. So they're just reversed, swapped out. And he has a total calculation of 258. And
I'm trying to understand this stuff that's here and the stuff that's here. What am I supposed to be looking at to understand what numbers?
Let's start with this document. This document here. Okay. Those were pictures of.
Because this is different than what's in my packet.
Okay. That's new information, and it was based on the last meeting. There was a question on the actual square footage for the artisan channel letter sign, and that's the engineering drawings that were submitted, and that's what was made.
So this was submitted, and this is what's on the building right now.
20 square feet. It's 2 by 10. So when you look at this sheet, this is a reconciliation. It says signage total where it says artisan front. It's really only 20, not 26. Okay. It doesn't really significantly. Under the middle, it says signage town, 26, artisan front. Okay. Okay. So if that were 20, and everything else added up, his 258 would be 252, and the signage request is for a 70 square foot pylon sign, and artisan wants to add a channel letter identical to the one that's on the side on the front, which is 20 square feet. So that 90 square foot add onto the 252 would get 340, 342. Okay, which would be in balance, but there's a sign on the side of the building that Military Supplies has that it's listed as a 4 by 8 sign, but it's only
2x8. It's like this little small sign on a piece of wood that's 4x8. So maybe at some point, whenever they made that sign, it might have been to replace an existing sign, but they made a small sign up there.
This one you're talking about?
Yes. So George has indicated that he would get rid of that sign and make it a 16 square foot sign so that it would reduce the 32 down to 16, and that would allow the new tenant to have 16 square feet of signage on the building, so they'd still be in compliance to the allowance.
What about a pylon sign for the new tenant?
Well, let me read the letter.
Fair.
Well, let me read the letter.
We're gonna end up with another problem down the road because that tenant is gonna put out illegal signs because he didn't get a pylon sign. I mean, I'm in favor of this. If you want to provide signage for artisan and the military, but if we're going to allow you to take that 80 square feet in the back, you need to provide space on the pylon for the future new tenant, along with some sort of signage on the building, to be fair.
Can I just read the letter? I don't know
Absolutely.
if you... Okay. Dear Mike, this is from George, and this was today. I reviewed the calculation of signage allowance and the allocation of...
I'm sorry, Randy, I'm sorry. That's not what I have here. Hold on.
Just let him read the letter.
Okay, go ahead.
Dear Mike, I have reviewed the calculation of the signage allowance and the allocation of square footage that Randy Hamilton presented to you. I agree with these calculations. The existing sign on the south side of Military Supplies is identified as 32 square feet. We will change that sign to only take up 16 square feet, and this space will become available for the new tenant we hope to secure for the rear 80-foot building. With the new ad on the Pylon Mattress Firm, I will authorize Military Supplies and Artisan Vapor to share this new space. Given the new tenant is in the back 80 linear foot, will likely be paying less rent, and at this time I don't feel necessary to give them space on the single pylon sign. Artisan has indicated they want to add another channel letter sign to the front of the building facing the Berlin Turnpike, and the calculation shown by Randy include this 2x10 or 20 square foot allowance. I've asked Randy to attend the meeting tonight to represent me as I will be out of town. Hopefully everything has been presented in a way that is clear to the TPZ commissioners to understand and approve this application. Thank you for your help in the process. I have invested quite a bit of money already with legal costs, building modifications, surveys, and will cost much more for the new signage that I will share the cost with my tenants. It's important that they have adequate signage so they too can have a better chance of staying in business. This allows me to pay my bills, taxes, and hopefully enjoy my retirement years. That was a letter that George wrote today. So his opinion is that they're in the back of the building. I only have one pylon, even though there's two separate entities. They're not going to be paying enough rent to justify getting that, but they'll get a sign and they can use the outside mattress firm, rear of Military Supplies. They're big enough front spaces that I think it would be a good destination point. And if it becomes a problem and he has a new tenant, then he can go to a mattress firm and reallocate that space. He won't ask for any more pylon space. You know, I mean, that's just...
Is that an assumption or you know?
Well, if he did, it's unlikely that would ever happen. You know, he's asking for an add to the pylon. He's using up all of the square footage allowed for the property. It's unlikely that he would even have any space to add it, let alone come in for a request. And again, I'm speaking on his behalf, but it doesn't make sense that he would go back and do it. He'd have to, based on an earlier suggestion that they partition the whole sign and not even do the bottom sign. But it's just not big enough to handle everybody. I know there's other properties that you know, when they have signage and they're on a side of a building and they don't get the frontage, they're not paying the retail primary frontage, so they don't get all the perks and the benefits by being in the back or in the rear of the plaza.
I have a question. Would there be enough space for his pylon sign if he took away signage size from other buildings that he's using as his lineal footage to meet? Am I saying that right?
I don't know.
If you made the mattress firm sign smaller, can you make room for the...
Are you talking about the pylon?
For the pylon.
Oh, you can, sure. Sure, he could reduce the size of the mattress firm, but he's worried that mattress firm, there's a lot of empty spaces on the pike, and he doesn't want to lose another tenant. And he's expressed that, I think, here and to me, but, you know, at this time, he doesn't need to address that with Mattress Firm. If it becomes a problem in renting that space out to somebody that's bigger that needs presence out there, I'm sure he'll have to address that, and he could split part of that off that top one, but to put all 4 potential tenants
Then we're
on
back
that.
here right where we're at now.
No, because that would be an add-in space. That would just be a reallocation. You're not
Or you'd have
adding
to
any.
redesign the whole sign. You'd have to redesign the whole sign to add the space for him if he wanted it. So what I'm saying is design the pylon for all your tenants, your existing tenants and your future tenant. And that, to me, makes sense. So now when he does all kinds of work to the back and he gets a tenant in the back, now they have a small allocation in the front, like everybody else. That's my opinion.
You're asking us to use the 80-foot linear footage of the back building. And you want us to use that as part of your calculation, but then you don't want to give the future tenant, if there is ever going to be one, without bathroom facilities and all the rest of the problems you have with that piece. You want to use that linear footage, but you don't want to give them any signage. So we could be seeing you back here with another problem. I have one of the things that are you aware that this sign is non-conforming the way it stands now, the pylon sign, because it's in the 35-foot setback area.
Right, and I believe Craig and Mike both have addressed that. I mean, Mike and Craig both are aware of that, and I think it's come up before.
We're trying to accommodate you, but you're pressing the envelope here with
Well, if that is all, sorry.
Technology.
If George needs to change the pylon, and that's the only way that he can get approval, then he'll change the pylon. He could change it and make it a part of either the Mattress Firm and address it now, or he can put it in the presentation that the new tenant, he would allocate that space if he chose to do it that way. He can't make it any bigger. You know, the 3.5 to 70 square feet that's being requested, you know, he can't make it any bigger than that because there's not enough square footage, and the 16 square feet would allow him to have space on the building. So we can't add any more. So if he has to partition that pylon in some way, I believe that's the only way. Sure, it wouldn't take much. He could just cut the vinyl off and put a strip of vinyl, you know, a narrow piece underneath Mattress Firm, and then reapply Mattress Firm. It wouldn't require changing the structure at all. It would just be a matter of cutting some vinyl and changing the digital part of it. So I don't think that, you know, there wouldn't be allowed. If he gets that kind of tenant, then he would be smart enough to make that kind of an allowance. You know, it's not like he's asking for more signage.
Well, originally it was only supposed to be for the artesian tenant, and then all of a sudden now he's going to add more space to it, and then you have a future tenant. So I mean, originally it was only the one tenant in the front that had the problem, and now you're expanding it and expanding it. All I know is that if we're going to allow you the 80 linear feet in the back, which is a far stretch, because I think half the building doesn't even have a concrete floor. There's no bathroom. Could it be remodeled to suit a tenant? Yes, it could. Okay, so if we're going to allow the 80 linear feet, I think that you should take whatever square footage that you have, that you're in compliance with, and divide it up 3 ways. A small space for artesian, a small space for military, and a small space for the future tenant.
I don't see where he would disagree with that. He will do that if that's the only way that this can move forward. I know he wants to make this happen. So if that's what the requirement is, I don't think he would argue that.
I think the greater issue you're going to have is it's not at all uncommon to see somebody is not allowed space on a pylon. Shopping centers are notorious for that. It's negotiated in your lease. You get your frontage over your space, whatever signage is allowed by code. You may or may not get pylon space. I understand Commissioner Payne's exactly right. If you took the same and reduced its size, you could accomplish it by adding all of them in. But for the space as it currently is probably not going to be somebody that would be doing quote unquote a retail type of business. It might be somebody that would be adequate with just storage that wouldn't necessarily care about. So I think it's kind of.
I just don't want to be back to where we're at today, and I'll use the McBride carpet area as a known, not using him directly, but that parcel as a known sign violator, the piece of land, and you have the same problem there. You have a tenant who's in the way back of that property, who is trying to change things and be helpful, but this is the same way this building's set up. I have to agree with Commissioner Payne that make the sign fit for those three buildings if you're going to use those three buildings as your 80 square feet. I mean, it's a lot harder to address something with you when the person who needs to answer our questions is not here.
I can answer the question for him. He's authorized me to do that. And I don't disagree. If that's the only way that this can go forward, and you specify that we have to allow space for 3 tenants, then we can do that. I can revise the design on it and send it on, to Craig and Mike. And
Is there still room for a building sign on that 80 linear foot area too? Like 16 or a small sign there? So in other words, he can adjust the military sign that's on the side of the building.
Exactly.
He can make adjustments to that to make up some extra space so that the 80 linear feet can have a small sign. And
by 8 sign would be perfect.
And then have 3 spaces, okay, 2 which are going to get filled up immediately, and then you'll have 1 blank space for the future tenant over there.
Right.
If you could do that and come up with and stay within the square footage, then I'm all for it.
Yeah. Then I see that as not as a problem.
Dan, you got anything to add?
No, I agree with Commissioner Payne.
Okay, Mr. Flannery, this is a continuation of, it's been on the agenda for some time. What is our time period here?
Well, yeah, we would need to close it tonight, but but what I would suggest is the applicant give his consent to keep the hearing open, so that the applicant can come back next week with a plan, a diagram showing. I guess what I'm hearing is space for all 3 tenants on the pylon. Signage, all three of the tenants, pylon sign, and you show how you're going to give, if you intend to, the rear unit some wall signage also. Mathematically, how you're going to give them some wall signage, 8 square feet, whatever. Because that's what I'm hearing the commission wants. That really should all be submitted during the public hearing. That really shouldn't come in after the hearing is closed.
I have a question on my 2 packets, and one is for the sign man here. This picture here is the current sign that's up. Right. Okay, so that's 27 inches tall.
It's 24 inches tall. I'm not sure. That's on an angle, that ruler. I don't think that's an accurate representation.
It's my printer may have collapsed.
It's 2 feet.
Constructed that incorrectly.
I know the tape rule's there, but it's on an angle, and it's 24 inches tall, and it's 10 feet long.
Okay. So who took this picture? Us?
Let's all be looking at it. This one. Okay, yeah, this came from the applicant. And I guess the question is, what is it supposed to represent?
Yeah, is that, I'm just trying to.
There's also a gap between them. So I know that the calculation is 20 square feet. and how, if you look at the letter on the top down to the T and then to the bottom of
the
it.
T to the bottom of the black at the bottom, that's 24 inches. So it looks, no offense, 27 inches, almost 28 in the photo. And then in this one, we show it the width 120 inches. Explain to me this light box.
There's a separate light box underneath the channel letters, and that's the electronic cigarette supplies.
So that's a
24 is the upper.
no, I get
No,
that.
the whole thing is 24.
So with the light box,
It's 24 with the electronic cigarette supplies.
so this here, this 120 inches that goes from the L to the S.
No, that's the whole length of the box. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Look at
that's
the
a
upper
typo
part.
then, where the line stops.
Yeah, the arrows.
So this is really, this arrow should go from end to end.
Right,
Okay.
as it does on top.
Okay, that's why I saw two different
Yeah.
sides. Okay. So that is what's lit up, is the electronic cigarette supplies.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Okay, you need to give us permission to keep this open as a public hearing, pressing the time period. If you don't give us it, then we'd have to act on it tonight, and it doesn't look like it would be pressed to.
I'll do whatever you ask me to do.
Just say yes.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so you will go back and come back to the next meeting. The hearing will still be open, and you'll present us with a visual of what the pylon's gonna look like, then visual of what the reduction in the signs that are on the building are gonna be with the size. And the, for the new tenant on the building, the square box with the size of where it's gonna be. And then you're all set.
Okay.
Okay, so go back to Mr. Emerson and tell him that he's gotta provide sign on the pylon for the other tenant.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends the public portion of the agenda. We'll move into, the next item will be new business petition 4516 zone text amendment, section 6.2 signs, Newington TPZ applicant. Planner.
Well, at the last meeting, the commissioners discussed the latest draft quite a bit. I didn't prepare a revised draft. My sense was the commissioners didn't have any changes to the draft, but, oh, I know what, Mike D'Amato was gonna give you a summary of how other towns handle zoning enforcement of temporary signs. I think there were 4 towns that he did that he compared, and I thought he sent that. I thought he sent that to you separately, but I'm not hearing any nods across the table.
No, it wasn't in our packet.
No, I know. I thought he sent it to you separately, but he did not. Oh, okay. Well, I know that was important to the commissioners to see how other towns that are similar to Newington handle the enforcement of temporary signs, because other towns don't seem to have as much trouble as we do, and it's probably because of the way their regs are written. So I'll get that to you for your next meeting.
Let me put this in perspective for the commission and the public. We originally started with this sign regulation of the ban taking out of the regulations temporary signs. We're at a point now because of some input from the public that they want the temporary signs to be left in, but with outrageous requirements that they wanted it 365 days a year. They want to put them wherever they want. They want no regulations, no controls at all. So we're at a position where I have to get a feel from the commissioners as to how you want to proceed. I brought up in the last meeting that without the proper enforcement, we can't move forward with this regulation. If we're not gonna enforce it, then we're not gonna make the change. We'll go to wait and we'll see how the vote goes to take it right out of the regulations. So I need input from you people as to what your feeling is. Now there's, another way that we could handle this is we could have where you want a temporary sign, you make application to the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, you bring in a site plan, bring in a rendering of what the sign looks like, you show us on the plan, you give us the exact days that you want to put them out, so we have it, and the commission will monitor it, and the commission will be responsible for maintaining the list and monitoring it. But we need some strict guidelines as to the days that they're gonna do it, the amount of time that the permit is good for, and make it a process that people just can't go out and do it. I could just tell you this, that the ZEO did go out this last weekend and he removed a bunch of signs that were on the turnpike. We had, one of the places,
Big Lots.
Big Lots, we had 10 or 15 signs just up and down the front of the property for the plaza there. So it's not getting any better. I mean, we have a moratorium. There should be none on anywhere. There shouldn't be any temporary signs at all. But we still have the problem. We still have the enforcement problem. And we talked about having this ticketing system, but we need to get that from the town attorney, along with the information from the zoning enforcement officer as to how other towns handle their enforcement. I'll start with Stanley. What do you want to see done, or what is your vision for this zoning regulation for signage?
My vision would be basically that, as you said, that either it comes before this commission and gets an application on a temporary basis for as long as it's going to be out, as long as there's some type of monitoring. The other issue is because it's within the state right of way, as you just alluded to, you know, that's a violation of state statute, as we discussed. So my concern is either we modify the zoning officer's hours of work and have them work Saturday and Sunday, or else we've got to come up with a better handle on it. I like your idea, Frank, of putting on an application where they got to come and apply for a temporary sign permit. But you're right, it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. And I don't know how Berlin or Weathersfield's handling it. I don't think there's anything out there on either one of those towns. Because I go by there and they're all over the place.
Michael?
Definitely need a special permit, and you can find a way to enforce it.
Talking to the mic so you can hear.
Special permit, go with a special permit, and they've got to come back every 30 days, something like that.
Or the permit would be good for a certain amount of time we would say that the sign, you get signage for so many days within a certain amount of time period, 2 months or whatever. I'm applying for the next 2 months, and these are the days that I'm going to have the sign out. And that way we'd be able to monitor it here. We'd be able to make a Excel spreadsheet, and we would all have it as part of our packet. And we would control, and we would know exactly which signs are legal and which ones are not.
Right.
The greater issue is enforcement.
Yes.
Because we have a moratorium right now.
Right.
Mike picked up 18 signs from one retailer up and down the turnpike, not just on their property, up and down the turnpike. So if there's no enforcement, or if management of that store is changed over so frequently that by the time he identifies with a manager and says you can't do this anymore, that corporate says this week's sale or this month's sale is this, you need to get the signs out, what's the manager going to do? He's not going to know any better. He's not going to worry about it because it's not his dime if there's a problem, and lay them out, and away they go. And that is the greater issue that needs to somehow get figured out. And I think enforcement in hitting it in a way that there's going to be some teeth to it is the only way of doing it. As far as hearing it on a special hearing, my only concern to that is we're gonna have 5-hour hearings. If you're gonna do that on a regular basis with the number of retailers that put these signs out. If
Well,
there's
I
a
don't-
means and a way, they're gonna do it.
I don't know if that's the case, because we talked to the planner, when the CEO talked about that, he only had 40 permits for a year. For a year, so no one's taking even the permits, they're just going out and putting the signs wherever they want.
So that's where
That's why I
that's the
suggested from
enforcement.
the beginning to eliminate the temporary signs. That's how bad it got, to the point where I'm saying it's so bad that there shouldn't be any. Because no one's complying, and it's too hard to be able to say, this guy has a permit, this one doesn't. Are these the days that he's supposed, or is he over the days? Is he putting it out at the right time? The locations, one of the big things about doing through a special permit is we'd have him bring in a site plan and show us where he's gonna put the sign. So we make sure that it's not in the state right away, that we make sure that it's not, obstructing or distracting drivers, or obstructing sight lines and so forth. And the look of the sign. We're not having these guys buying $2.50 plastic paper signs and sticking them all over the place. He don't care if we take them away. If he got 2 or 3 hours worth of visual from that sign, he's happy as hell for $2.
Yeah, I think the greater thing I think we should concentrate on the enforcement side as well is any way, and Craig, this will come to you, is there any way of tying this into, I'm going to say, special permits that are required for restaurant or bars that have to come in on a periodic basis for inspections, that if they have X amount of these violations, that they're not going to be able to renew?
Well, something that Mike had suggested to me in our conversation in the last couple of weeks is whatever system we come up with is a permit that's only good for 4 months. And Mike will keep track. And if at the end of 4 months, the applicant comes back for a renewal, if the applicant has not been playing by the rules, the renewal gets denied. Whereas if they have been playing by the rule, no problem, their extension is approved.
But I mean, it comes back to the primary thing is we got to have something with some teeth in advance to say it's just not going to happen, and this is what's going to happen if you do.
The enforcement, the way it is now, is so cumbersome for the zoning enforcement officer that it's almost non-existing to him. If he sees a sign, comes back, he has to do the research, he sends them a letter. By the time that happens, it's 2 weeks down the road. People take the sign out, so that violation has ended. 3 days later, he puts the sign back out. That starts a new violation. So he comes out, he sees the sign, comes back, writes up a violation, sends them a letter. It takes 2 weeks before that. So they could skirt this. There's no penalty. There's no nothing.
Yeah. And the other thing that they seem to be doing is the smart ones are putting it outside of the state right away, where if he sees them in the state right away, he's just taking them right away. So the ones that are putting them out there are losing them right away, but the smart ones are putting it outside of the right of way in the hopes that he just won't go and yank them. And I don't think he's touching them if they're outside of the right of way. I don't think he's doing removals on them.
I'm in favor of the special exception, having them come in. Then we'll be able to keep track of them. I wouldn't give the permits out for too long of a period of time so that we can keep track to see if they're complying. As far as enforcement, I think the ticket system will correct the enforcement issue. I think with a stiff fine, and I want to be business friendly, so I would ask the zoning official that he give at least 2 warnings first and then give the ticket. And I think it should be a steep fine, and that's the only way. If it's a steep fine, that's the only way that you're going to stop the people, because some of the people feel that if it's a small enough fine, they'll leave the sign out there because it's worth it. So it has to be a steep fine, and I would tie the fines in so that it's almost similar to the parking, and I would put the blight on there, the zoning. I have it all on one ticket, and it would be similar to a parking ticket, and it would go to the court systems, I believe, and that would be the best method to take care of it. And I think it was all designed up and everything. We talked about it numerous times. I think that's what we should implement. I think that'll take care of the enforcement I don't think people are gonna wanna pay a $200 or a $250 ticket fine every time they violate it.
And just to clarify, those fines do not go to us, i.e. the municipality, they go to the state, correct?
I'm not sure, I don't know how that
I
works.
believe that's.
I'm not sure how it would be, but
Under the statute, and I don't have it with me now, but I seem to remember that there is a warning the first time, second time, I think it's a $300 fine. Because the state property is not, you're not allowed to do any type of signage on state property for commercial use or monetary gain. And I believe that's, I emailed it to both you and the town planner. So you already have the teeth there for it. And you already have the capability of doing it. It's just a question of how you want to enforce it. And it might be a good idea, it's only a thought, but maybe what should happen is that the constant violators that you have up there, give them a copy of that state statute so they're put on notice, if that's the way you want to go with it.
I was just gonna say, instead of the temporary signs, I'd rather have some of these people come back and see if they have any signage, permanent signage on their buildings available. And I'd rather have them modify or correct their permanent signage than give them temporary signs.
The only problem with that is that's usually generated from, if it's a multi-space, it's usually generated from the landlord who will dictate how much footage they've got.
Mr. Clark?
I've not been around long enough to understand the true backbone of the sign issue. I mean, from what I've read and heard, it's gone many, 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 many years. I've seen an improvement on what the zoning officer has done. Enforcement, I think, is something that should go maybe toward the Blythe side of it. I think our Blythe has a little more teeth as a supplement. And when our zoning, it would say temporary signs if goes through, violations are subletted through the Blythe ordinance.
There's no
The flag ordinance doesn't cover signs, it only covers signs.
yeah.
But you're trying to find something that has a teeth in enforcement. That ordinance has it.
But tickets,
I don't think so.
It doesn't.
You might think that it does, but I've seen.
You don't have to go outside of.
Longer than our process.
But, well, then that should be explained by Mike, because he made it out last meeting that it was like he gets the complainant in on that ordinance, boom, 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 a hearing officer, done. So, truthfully, I say you take the zoning or the temporary sign ordinance out of it and don't allow them, and put the onus, put it back on the owner of the property, the landlord of these areas, to redesign their signs to come before us and say, hey, we got these weird shaped buildings. You know, yes, Walmart has a big sign out front, but what if they had 50 little businesses in that parkade? Let them come to us instead of us having 700 temporary signs showing that there's a mattress sale or something. Take it out and put the onus back on the owners of the property to come before us and redesign their signs to accommodate it. And if we have to make areas a little bigger, a little smaller based on the need, and it's a way to not worry about sending Mike out to do waste of work, because it's a waste. It's a waste. It's a waste of our taxpayers' money. It's a waste of his time. Take it out and let the owners of the companies come and change their signs in the front of their business to accommodate their back door or backside tenants.
It's not just that isn't the whole. That is the whole problem. That small, minuscule part is the side tenants. The most of them are
the guerrilla marketers.
It's the good example is the one that was what was it?
Big Lots.
Big Lots. They wanted to have a sale, so they went out and bought 50 signs, and they just went up and down the turnpike and stuck them into the ground all over the place. Not even on their own property.
But if
that's
you go
what we're
by,
trying to fight.
If you go by any Big Lots on that same weekend, you'll see the same thing. And I don't. It's a corporate thing, and it's almost like they don't care what what fury may be created, because they'll do it usually, not always, but usually they'll do it by region and just, you'll see them everywhere.
I think when the businesses realize that they can't put them next to the roads, that they're not even going to apply, because the right of ways are so big that, and once they realize that they can't put it in the right of way, that might solve a little bit of the problems. The ticket system, I think, is really going to make a difference, because instead of like going out there, making a list of everything, coming back, looking up the properties, filing the paperwork, sending a certified letter, waiting for it to come back, he could write out a ticket immediately when he sees the sign. Here's your first warning. If I come back tomorrow, I'm going to give you my second warning. If I come back again, you're getting a $250 fine. Period. End of story. The only thing we need to do, and we need to figure out, is how do we solve this problem for the weekends? So that would be whether or not you have somebody else that can handle it over the weekends while Mike's out, or whether Mike has to come in and drive during the weekends, or whether or not you assign somebody else the same duties for the weekends. That would be my only concern.
If it's the same as a parking ticket, is it something that the PD could enforce?
I don't know.
If it's statute, I mean, that's something to look at also.
I don't think they want to be involved in it, though.
If it's municipal.
They have enough to do. So I don't think we should rely on the police department to hand out our sign tickets. They have more than enough things to
But
do.
if they're handing out the parking tickets, which are currently being handled by them.
I know, but it would be asking a lot to try to make them do that too and keep up with it. They have so much to do. I'm just saying, I mean, a commission member could do it, or maybe Mike could come in on the weekends. I don't know, but that's a problem we need to look at. And if we can solve that problem along with the ticket thing, I think, and then have them come in for a special exception if they want a sign, then more than accommodating. We could encourage them to look at their signs on the building to see if they have any extra space at the same time, and or give them. Mike talked about a banner. So there's a couple different options.
The planner, what are your thoughts? You know, we got the pushback from the Chamber of Commerce. It's generally, you know, I don't know how many people actually that signed after looking at the names that signed the petition, are actually people that even have temporary signs. I think they just signed it because of a couple of people that have it. Most of the problems are on the Berlin Turnpike. We see them some in the center of towns and some in the neighborhood business areas. But give us your take.
Well, I think the commission needs to make a tentative policy decision as to whether you think the temporary sign regulation is in any way salvageable, or if it just doesn't work. The temporary signs on the Berlin Turnpike just don't work. You kind of have to make at least a tentative decision about that. And once you've done that, then Mike and I will draft a regulation that deletes the temporary one and replaces it with fill in the blank, and then run up the flagpole, have the public hearing on it, and see what testimony, what information you receive from the public about it.
Just to clarify, the temporary sign issue in this town is town-wide. Not just Berlin Turnpike. It's town-wide. Go by 7-Eleven on Willard. And I get they get the new business signs, etc. You go by the intersection of Main and Stoddard on a weekend. There might be promoting a business down on North Mountain Road, having a sale on tile, etc. So it's more than just, a lot of those are a little less presentable. They're usually handwritten. But, the ones on the Berlin Turnpike are definitely name brand stores. So if we're going to do some policy, we can't just do it in the XYZ zone. It has to be the whole town. I don't go down that side of town. I spend more of my time on the one side on the weekends, and I see it, and it looks disgusting.
Okay.
I agree with you. It is a town-wide thing. Until the chairman presented the signs as a special exception, having them come in, I was all for getting rid of the signs almost, because it was a serious problem. But I think that we might be able to salvage it if we rewrite the regulations that it doesn't allow temporary signs, or temporary signs have to come in for a special exception. And then this commission can control it a little better. And I think in combination with the enforcement, we have to get that ticket system up and running. And if we do those two things, we could give that a try. And in 6 months, if it's still a problem, then we could always look at it again.
Okay, how do we go about with this ticketing thing? We talked about this, we've been talking about this for 5 years.
Excuse me, I
Get to a resolution, we never get to someone saying, okay, this is how we implement it, and this is how we do it. I think it has to go to the council. I mean, it's not just us saying, okay, let's pick up some tickets and start handing them out. There's more of there's law here, there's legislation that has to be passed.
I was just going to say, well, if the commission is fully in favor of a ticket system, why don't we take a vote on it and send it to, ask for the town attorney to draft something up and send it to the council? And the TPZ could write a letter to go along with it, or we could go up there and present our ideas to the council of why we're doing it. I think that most of it is all ready to go. I think that the town attorney probably has to relook at it and figure out maybe some few details, but if this commission is in favor of the ticket system, maybe we should take a vote and move it forward.
Okay, why don't you make a motion to that effect, and we'll take a vote on it, and we'll keep the goods to the planner as to.
I'll make a motion that we institute a ticket system for enforcement of the temporary signs and
Zoning violations.
okay, a ticket system for any zoning violations. Let's see here.
Direct the town planner to have the town attorney reinvestigate the work that he's done on the ticketing system, and make and send it to the town council for action.
Okay.
Does that work, Mr. Planner?
Okay, so the motion would be that the commission agrees with the need to institute a ticket system for zoning violations, and that the town planner should ask the town attorney to investigate the previous work done on this issue and to send it to the town council for action.
Along with a letter from the chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Fred and I will come up with a letter. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
I'll
right.
sign the letter.
Okay.
Second the motion.
Motion made and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so unanimous vote of the commission. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us here, one absent. So let's proceed that way. We'll keep the petition 4516, the sign thing, on as new business. Continue it until we come to a resolution.
And what I'll do for your next meeting is come up with another draft which makes it a special permit process, or at least some mechanism, maybe not special permit because that adds a month to the time frame. It's not very busy.
How do
but
we
make
do
it
like
we do for tent sales.
Yes.
Yeah. They have to get on the agenda. They have to be a complete application, but it can be taken care of that same night. Yeah, if you want to. Okay. I'll have something for you.
We want it,
Understood.
Commission review.
But still with teeth, still something that the commission has a say in, rather than it being staff approval, which is how it is now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, the next item under new business objectives for fiscal year 2017-2018. Any commissioners have anything they want to forward as part of the plans for the next 2 years? Mr. Payne?
I came up with a little language. I don't know how it is, but I'll read it to you, and then you can decide if you like it or if you want to add to it. the town planning and zoning will continue to work on reviewing its regulations using the 2020 Town Plan of Conservation and Development as our guide, recognizing that redevelopment of older property will help support the town's grand list, always taking great care in protecting Newington's residential property from commercial encroachment, blight, and other quality of life issues.
Any comments,
Just an accurate mission statement.
planner?
Okay, I heard three key points.
Just gonna give you the thing, you don't have to write.
Okay, but still, just like, okay, regulation review, emphasize older properties, and protect neighborhoods from commercial encroachment.
You have other things that you wanna put in as the,
I'll go back and look, but I think all of the issues over the last few years that I found in the POCD that I thought that this commission should work on, you've started. Things like sidewalks, you don't know it, but the staff is working on a sidewalk plan to address the POCD's recommendation for sidewalks. Other things like that, off the top of my head, I don't recall, but I'll go back and look to see if there are any other elements of the POCD that aren't being worked on already, and add to the list.
next item on the agenda is old business petition 3016, in conjunction TOD overlay district text amendment and map amendment. New section 2.19B, TPZ applicant contact, open it up for discussion. Anybody want to start? Pam?
Thank you, Chairman Aida. Several people have contacted me that live in the Willard Avenue area, and they live in those homes that are considered historic, and they're concerned about this because the historical area is on Willard Avenue itself, and the area behind some of these homes is industrial. They're concerned about some type of buffering in there, and I know Commissioner Payne had said that he wanted some type of buffering in there. I want to make sure those residents are protected if we do any type of development back there.
Okay, you're talking about the homes that are in the defined area that we
In the
talked about,
TLD, that's correct.
we talked about last week, that triangular piece. That
Right,
runs
yes, that's correct.
From Francis Avenue down to Spruce.
No, from West Hill down to the West Hartford, Newington town line, and along up to the guideway.
Okay, so we're talking because there's some historical houses up on Willard Avenue that are not part in this zone.
Right. This is the piece from West Hill's northerly and north and east on that side there.
So we're talking about the same.
Right. They're concerned with the fact that, they may do something back there that could decrease your value. And they were concerned about this. And I said, well, they should write letters to the commission and to the planner on this issue. They want to be protected. I still believe that all of those residents should be protected. I don't know what the width of the buffer zone should be. I think it should be enough to give them the privacy that they want, and not have, some type of entertainment in there or something like that, eventually may apply if it's a restaurant or something, may apply to an outside venue, which the noise would then carry.
Mr. Minor.
I agree with the Commissioner. I think that we have to make sure that the residents are protected over there. I'm wondering if the town planner could, that triangular piece that you have there, yeah, is it possible that we could write down, whether it's industrial, PD, on each piece of property that's in there? So, and if the residentials are on the street, are they R12, are they R20? Just in that, not all the way down, but.
Well, you mean one was already there? Because if green is industrial, beige is residential. And then those two little blue ones are business.
The blue ones are business.
So the sky blue are business.
Green's industrial.
Dark blue residential would be really Avenue District overlay thing, but these are residential R12. These are all R12, and this is industrial.
So that beige one in between the two purple one.
These are all residential.
And where are they?
Ignore the dark purple. Think of them all as beige. These are all residential.
R12 or R20?
The beige one in between the purple one, that's a vacant lot. It was a house, they knocked it down 25 years ago.
It's flat. Okay. Big lots. Mr. Clapton.
Question back on the buffer that was brought up. Would the buffer be more oriented toward the application that's coming in? Because some of those residential properties that abut Willard might be part of that new
And
design.
the way it's written now, it could be part of it, but unless we say that that triangle isn't going to be on the road, it's going to be behind those houses, so that the houses are always going to be there. And then we could put something in there where there's a little extra buffer.
So you're starting to do spot zoning then?
No, I'm not doing spot zoning.
You're going to take. I guess what I'm trying to understand is
he wrote the triangle just in a general thing there, but I don't know if we ever determined that it was going to include every piece in that triangle. It was just a guide.
Okay, but
let's look at this scenario. The developer came in, has a plan, it's gonna bring it to the town planning and zoning commission, and he purchases and starts assembling pieces, and he gets options on 3 or 4 of the residential pieces. And he ties it into the some of the industrial pieces in the back. We would look unfavorably upon that if the people wanted to sell their houses. What are we saying to those people? That you could only for now and eternity, you could only keep, this house has to stay a house? Can't do that.
People,
can I?
Other people in.
I just want to. I'm on what. That's where I was going with this. And if that was to happen, there would definitely need to be, if a corner lot stayed residential and that said developer bought 4 other residential lots to incorporate the back industrial lots, yes, they need to have some form of a buffer in place for those other lots. And this goes back to what I brought up last meeting, is if you move that line in to just incorporate the green, you're defeating the point of the TOD overlay, because your access points are minimizing the potential property of a TOD overlay. You have to maximize that triangle as is, or you're only giving them 2 streets to try to do a overlay district for an area that this town and the people who live here are trying to make better.
I want to speak. I own a house. I own a house.
Hang on a second. This is not a public hearing.
But you say that, but you never invited me to all the other meetings.
Okay, you will have an opportunity to speak under public participation.
Not on this, you can't.
Not on this. So my
house is in the green, right behind the purple house.
You can't. You're putting us in a position where we're be violating our regulations.
What position are you putting me in, taking my house?
We ain't taking nothing. We haven't to make any decisions.
Well, I'm listening to the discussion of saying that they're going to give the development this area of the triangle, and I'm not in one of the purple houses. I live right exactly adjacent to the purple house on Spring Street.
Can I continue, Chairman?
I apologize, but
or Commissioner?
You never invite to any meetings. You haven't sent out any letters to the people that live in that triangle area, and you haven't even included us in there.
We're not at the point to.
Not at the point. You sound like you're progressing pretty well. When is the point? When it's too late?
Yeah, she's ready. So, all I brought up was the buffer, that it is needed in any type development. It has to be, it needs to be specific. You'll have to come back because I'm lost with my train of thought of being interrupted.
Well, can I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you speak to the man's concerns? He did voice them. Let's put it out on the table. Right now, this is under new business. We're looking at
old business.
Old business. we've looked at this area, we've defined the area that we would consider for an overlay. We haven't made any motions, we haven't done anything at this point yet. We had public hearings on this. The residents
Public
weren't.
hearings, no one was notified. No one sent any notification to my house or to myself that you were gonna have a public hearing, that my house could be in jeopardy. So how do I come to the public hearing if I don't hear about it?
Well, it's true that the laws don't require that every property owner be sent a notice that there's a proposed major zone change been proposed by the commission. You're right, there's no requirement that individual notice be sent, but legal notices were published. There were many articles in the newspaper. The commission kept the hearing open week after week after week after week, 4 weeks, to get input from the public. There was very little input from the public. The commission asked me to have to contact the newspapers to get the reporters to write stories about this, to try to solicit more input. Not much. So I don't know how much more the commission can do to get input from the public other than what they're. Yes, we could send notice to every individual letter. But let me point out to you that if this is approved, nothing changes for your property. You will be able to continue to do what you've always been able to do with your property. What will be different is you will be able, in addition to what you can currently do, you'll be able to do additional things if you choose to. But what you can currently do, you'll always be able to do. That's never.
Because you guys have already brought up this subject, I can't even sell my house because nobody wants to buy my house thinking that it's going to be purchased by this.
Purchased by what?
Or that this development is going to. There's no promise that our houses aren't going to be taken.
You mean sold? Only you can sell your house. Nobody can take your house from you.
I'm saying right now, if I were to put my house up for sale,
right?
I know that this committee is talking about what's going on now. I have no chance of selling my house.
Because someone might think it's worth too much. This will only increase value.
Just on the property here, I'm not one of the purple houses. I'm in the green, so they can take my house.
Oh, so you're in the industrial zone.
I have one house touching the purple house. I am Spring Street.
In the green. Okay, so
Must be because I'm not purple.
Okay, so your house is in the industrial zone then. Okay.
I am on Spring Street, which is you take the right on the first house on Spring Street.
Yeah, so it's the first parcel right there on the right.
Very first house.
Right there. No, one over. To the right.
Right there.
Right there.
Right there.
Green.
Been there for
Industrial zone. So if you have a house there, your grandfather to be able to stay as a house for as long as you want. For that matter, you could turn it into a tool and die shop tomorrow if you want to. And if the zone change goes through, you'll still be able to do that if you want to. But in addition to that, you'll be able to, probably with your neighbors, because you're not going to be big enough, to come into the town with a proposal for some kind of a mixed use of business and residential.
That's what I want to do in my house. That I have a pool and a family and all that stuff. I want to turn it into a.
Then let it stay the same. You'll always be able to do what you've always been able to do. This doesn't take away any of your rights.
Right. Well, that's my reason why I came to the meeting, because no one's contacted us, no one's talked to us, no one said anything.
Now that you talk, would you please tell us your name and address for the record, because so that we have it on the record.
I appreciate it, and I apologize for.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
No one's spoken to me, and one of the neighbors said, "Oh, do you know they're going to put a roadway for your house?" I'm like, "What?"
No, they're not.
What is your name, sir?
Pierre, P-I-E-R-R-E, LePage, L-E-P-A-G-E.
And your address is
21
Spring Street.
So, yeah, all those historical houses are on the Willard, but I'm the first house on Spring Street, right inside of it.
Right, and you're the property that you're on, you have a house on it, but it's not zoned as a residential piece of property. It's zoned as industrial. That's the zone that you're in. You could have, obviously your house is there, so you're using the industrial piece of property as a residence. You could continue to do that, but your piece of property is probably worth more as an industrial piece if something gets developed in that area, or if we put this overlay zone, your property is going to be worth more money if you choose to exercise that right. You don't have to sell. You could do whatever you want.
I appreciate it.
And we're not, trust me, we're not trying. There's no eminent domain here. There's no taking of property. We're trying to. We're mandated by the state to try to do transit-oriented development. Not mandated. I'm saying maybe that's too strong a word. We're encouraged by the state to do transit-oriented development. So we've already done it on on property on Fen Road. This is the last piece where the bus station is, and we're trying to accommodate the transit-oriented development with certain zone to encourage development of these pieces of property. And we've determined that this is the area where we want to include as part of that overlay zone. It does not affect the underlying zone at all. You don't have to sell. You do whatever you want. Your property is protected. Want to sell?
Because you hear all different kinds of stories and stuff, and like this, never have been invited to this, and didn't even know what was going on because I work all the time.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. I hope we explained it so you
Well,
feel relieved that you're not here trying to take your property. Okay. So, Mr. Clapper, go ahead.
Oh, my only, in regards to the petition, my only concern is where
we draw the line.
No, but on certain things of where we've come up with, for instance, I don't want high density residential in this community. It's not needed. We have enough of it already. I live in a high density community, and it pains me sometimes. But how did we come up with just for the mixed use development of the 10 units per acre when we already have stipulations in zoning for our devices?
That's
Huh?
This is
No. That's Shuri Drive.
That's 10 units per acre, so that's what the 10 units.
That's high density
10 is not high.
No, but that's classified high density housing.
It's classified as 10 units per acre.
But what's its zoning?
10 units per acre. It's zoned for 10 units per acre. So that's where the 10 number came from.
It's classified
because that's
high density.
already the allowable density in that area. That's what the number came from. It came from in there. It came from what's already allowed in that vicinity.
But what is the number what is the high density housing number?
There's no high density housing. It's not high density housing. Oh, you mean what zone is it?
Isn't Surrey and Royal Villas and those are high density housing, right?
No. It's RP zone, residential plan.
So
you're using a vague term, and I'm using a precise number. 10 units per acre is the density of that project, of that development.
Across the street there.
Right.
I think maybe he's getting at is that the maximum on any other?
Yeah, in this town, if there are
what's
other
the maximum allowed?
That's okay. That's where I'm trying to figure out what's our max.
Well,
to give a number to people to show that 10 is a lot or 10 is a little.
Well, that's exactly why that's a big part of why I suggested using 10 units per acre, because I could point to a neighborhood right across the street that is 10 units per acre. So if someone wants to know what does 10 units per acre look like, I'll send them to, I don't know the name of the street.
Okay, but
that's what 10 units per acre looks like.
But does that complex, if you use that analogy with a resident, look different than driving up Fen Road and going to the Pulte development, which is the same color?
I don't know what that means.
Well, you say to them, if you want to see what 10 units per acre is, go to this complex.
Right.
And I drive into that condo complex and I see stack flats. That's what they're called. They're stacked flat condos. They're stacked one on top of each other. But if I want to drive down Fen Road and look at I forget the name of it, the Pulte subdivision up on the hill, those are townhomes stacked left, they're row houses, which have a lot of different meaning. Visually, they're two different things, but density-wise, if you looked at them as a common core person, you'd see that they look totally different. If you're in the industry, you know that they're the same. But visually, so my question is 10 units per acre, if I look at your example, looks different than 10 units an acre up the street. So, and in our town, we can use more than 10 units per acre. We're not really defining
What do you mean we can use more than?
Is there areas in town you can build more than 10 units per acre?
Not
or that have been built more than 10 units per
that
acre?
in the past, yes, there are areas of town that I think are like 20 units per acre that were developed, decades ago.
And they fall under what zoning law?
Well, it's murky. They fall under a zoning district that no longer exists on the map, but obviously they physically exist. This is getting really off topic here, but
You're trying to define in this discussion what high-density housing is, and I don't think we could do that because that.
No, I want to.
What this is going to be high-density housing. I don't know that it is.
But if 10 units an acre at your example, that's a lot of houses to put in a TOD overlay district.
I would say
that'd be like pick up that condo complex and put it in the TOD. To the visual, that's high-density housing, which we don't want in this town. But to 10 units an acre, we don't want high-density housing. We already have enough of it. So we're giving an example of what 10 units an acre is, and you're telling them it's high-density housing.
No, I'm saying it's not. 10 acres is not high-density. It's not.
But that complex has high-density housing.
No, it isn't. It's only 10 units per acre.
That's a lot of density. That's a lot of units for. We'll take Hampton Court. It's 94 units, and how many acres?
I don't know. That's why I didn't look to Hampton Court, because it's on.
It's within the half mile of. I mean, I know I'm maybe splitting hairs, but I know the 2020 doesn't want high-density housing. I'm pro-housing, and I don't want high-density housing. But we have to define it better than 10 units per acre.
I think it's an excellent. I think that's an excellent definition of medium density.
Already in our regulation.
No, there is no definite.
There's no definition of high-density housing in our regulation. It doesn't say that over 20 units per acre is high density, and less than 20 is medium, and less than 10 is small density or little density. There's no definition.
But 10 units an acre can be pretty high amount of people living in that compacted area.
Bad design is bad design. There, I could show you projects that had a relatively low density, but were so badly designed that you didn't realize. We know that.
Yeah.
And vice versa. There are well-designed projects that are much higher density that you wouldn't know because they were so well designed. Unfortunately, our regs can't mandate good design. We're stuck with what we get. The only thing we can mandate is a maximum density, and 10 units per acre seemed like a good number to use because that's a number that already exists in that vicinity.
Well, that's where I'm
across the street.
That's what I'm confused at. I don't see how you can unless
the map. That area there is considered a moderate density residential area. Okay. According to the residential development plan and the 2020 plan. Highest density residential is on the corner of Richard Street and Willard Avenue, the apartments over there, that would be considered one of the highest densities in town.
Mr. Commissioner, what page are you looking at?
I'm looking at page 33. Yep, 33. Now, I don't know.
2020?
Yeah, in the 2020 plan, yep, on page 33.
And that's to correct you, that's where I've seen the wordings of high density, low density, moderate.
Now, I don't know how many units over on the corner of Willard and Richard it is over there. Salem Village, I think it is.
It's Salem Village, Deerwood, and Southwood.
Right. Right, there too. Yep, Southwood, yeah. So that would be considered.
And that's where thank you, that's where I saw it today and was saying, you take those same moderate density, those.
Would you consider, Anthony, single family housing on R12 lots would be low density housing? That's four units per acre. So 10 units per acre would not be high density housing. That would be moderate density housing. And anything old, when you start approaching 20 and higher, you would be talking high density housing.
I agree with you. But the amount of housing you're gonna put on a corner, on an acre in that triangle, you put 10 units on top of another structure. Those 10 units the density is not based on size, or are you looking at it at square footage, or are you looking at it you could put 10, 1,500 square foot condos on an acre and it looked like low density housing because there's only 10 people or 2 bedrooms. But if you get a 3,000 square foot townhouse, they get pretty big. Even though you're not within the density, you're within the density of 3,000 square foot townhome on top of a mixed use off Spring Street on a acre plot of land. That's a lot of house.
I think the planner just threw the 10 out because it was kind of moderate and not really high density as a guideline. And then, I mean, we're still at the beginning stages of trying to figure this out, but you have a good point on determining whether or not, making sure that it's not high density. So I agree with you that we should look at it and compare it to other areas of town and try to pick something that is reasonable for the area, if that makes sense.
Maybe we should go and look at other projects that have been done in other towns too, so we got a better idea, and the public can see that too later. So they're not just thinking housing.
As I'm looking through in the same mapping here, the differences are clear that the highest density residential, by clarification of this map, is anything essentially apartments. Its statement of moderate density residential are all residential 0.25, 0.20 lots, so very small lot size considered to the house. So I think you got to be careful with throwing a term around it being high density. What my consumption of high density in my mind is a lot different than any of the condos. You're right. Some of them are laid out much better, but that one, I think we got to be careful with throwing that term around because I don't consider that high density by any stretch.
I'm just saying that our overlay should coincide with the 2020, and you're going to put a small little triangle of an overlay, and just looking at their, which would be page 33, 1, 2, 3, 4, within a half mile of there's, from all the other past meetings I've come to, there's at least probably 10 to 15 parcels that are classified highest density residential per their plan, not our plan as a TPZ. But we want our TPZ laws to coincide with what people have said in this 2020 plan. And I brought it up more of where do we get the 10 from, because 10 could be classified high density housing.
You want to try to change that to something more than 10, you could try. But I think that the conclusion that the planner came up with was reasonable to think that 10 is not high density housing in my mind. But you got to remember that all of these parcels, every one of these parcels have to come back to this commission for a special permit. So the public will be notified. Everybody it goes to a public hearing. The public has input on each one of these changes. So nothing happens in this overlay zone without public hearing and public notification. So that's the protection that the public has as to what happens.
Public notified? Because do I have to sign up for some kind of email thing or something?
It's
Commissioner.
You will get notified of these if your lot abuts any lot that comes in with a proposal to be developed as a mixed use project. So if you're abutting, you will get a letter from the town. My office will send it to you.
Talked about a lot of stuff on this. I think that we leave it on the agenda as old business and come back to it again at the next meeting. The next item on old business is petition 4616. Bob Sarah was the one that initiated this, change. At this point, he's not at the meeting. I would like to, put this off until the next meeting and, discuss it. And hopefully he'll be here, discuss it and take it to a vote at that time. In deference to him, he was the one that, instigated or initiated this change. So, I think it would only be fair that we allow him the opportunity to be here to vote on it and voice his opinion. So we'll take it up next time, but we're at the point where we gotta vote on this. Okay, next item is, petitions, for scheduling. Turn it over to the planner.
Okay, excuse me, this is an application for a institutional daycare, the Goddard School, on a property on Alumni Road. They've submitted a site plan along with their special permit, and the staff has reviewed the site plan, but it's on the agenda so that the public hearing can be scheduled, and I suggest we do it at your next meeting.
Will we have all the information then?
Well, the town engineer has gone through the plans and come up with 2 pages worth of comments. We're meeting with the applicant tomorrow, I believe, to go over those issues. It's certainly possible that when we start the hearing, if you do it on February 8th, that at that point there may still be some difference of opinion between the town engineer and the applicant's engineer as to whether the plan meets all the requirements, but it'll be ready for a public hearing.
I'm going to try to get it to the point where these applications that come in are closer to being complete when we get them for scheduling.
Right, and
I don't want to stifle anybody, but we don't want to have the public hearing and have a litany or a laundry list of all kinds of stuff from the town planner and the town engineer that weren't satisfied before we schedule.
Right, well, it's a balancing act. The applicant obviously wants to get moving, and so as the staff, I don't want to bottle it up until the plans are exactly perfect, because that's not fair to the applicant. But on the other hand, I hear the chairman's point that if the plans are defective in a lot of ways, then maybe it doesn't benefit anybody to have a hearing on it. But I think we're at the point where it would be beneficial to begin the hearing.
That's something that you have to, as the planner, decide yourself. Right. We'd like to see them as complete as possible when we get them.
Right,
So
and there
we
are
don't
applications.
have a lot of, we always have some questions, the engineer always has some questions, you have questions, but we don't need to have a laundry list of stuff where we're so far away and what we're looking at.
Right, and I do hold some back. You don't always get them right away. Sometimes I do hold back if they're not ready, if I don't feel they're even ready for the hearing. But this one, I think it's ready for the public hearing.
Good, so we're gonna put this on for the, for what hearing?
The 28th, I'm sorry, the 8th, your next meeting.
February 8th will be on for a public hearing, so, be prepared to come to the commission. Next item on the agenda is, town planner report.
I didn't have any report this month.
Okay, communications, we have.
Excuse me, I have a Grog?
Yes, I'm going to write for that now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There's a CROG meeting last Thursday. 2 things were discussed. One was a sustainable CT. They showed a presentation done in the state of New Jersey, where basically what they were looking for is private contributions, excuse me, for monies to buy open space. And it was put on by his professor from Eastern Connecticut. It was an interesting presentation. I did ask, both myself and Councilwoman Bedrejka were there. We both asked her, is there any money attached to this? And well, only what you could get. There was no funding on that. So the other issue that came out was the weekly review of proposals. And there was one in New Britain where they're showing a change in the zone down by Connecticut Fast Track. And they were changing that to make some changes to this petition to B1, and I'm not sure what that is, neighborhood business, I guess. A2 and A3, high-rise apartments. The other thing too that I got in the an email, which I've asked the planner, which everybody has a copy of, is the proposals of what CROG is pushing through, or supporting rather. And you're going to see if you go through them, There's quite a few that are interest. Dedicated town road funds, spending on state budget issues, mandates for local governments to enact a delay of implementation. Goes all the way through here, and there's quite a few. So my strong suggestion would be to take a look at this. As I get these, I will forward both to the chairman and to the town planner for distribution to the rest of the members. That was pretty much about it.
And if excuse me, if any of the committee members want any of these bills, I can send them to you.
Oh, you also have to remember that this is a changing process daily.
I think the deadline to submit bills has occurred, I think either today or tomorrow, so there shouldn't be any more after this.
Right.
Any other communications, Mr.
Yeah.
Next item is public participation.
Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. I'm just curious, and I know you can't or don't get into a dialogue, but with this gentleman here being so upset like he was, I'm just curious. I knew about the public hearings, they were in the paper, things like that, but if it were someone other than the town or the TPZ that was the applicant for the overlay district text amendment and map amendment, would it have been advertised in any other way? I know this isn't the same, but like Alumni Road, letters were sent out to everybody in the area, and I just don't know how it works when TPZ is the applicant as opposed to, say, the Amara project where the people get notified. I know signs go up that there's an application pending and things like that. I just feel for the guy, you know, I mean, that's just my own.
We'll let the planner address that.
Okay.
Well, that's a good point, because Amara wanted a zone change. Well, I don't think they did, but let's say your typical situation, McDonald's buys a house that's in a business zone and or in a residential zone. Bad analogy again. In any event, if a private property owner wants to change the zone of their land, they come in for a zone change. The process is the town, my office, notifies all the abutting property owners. But when the Planning and Zoning Commission wants to change the zone for an entire area, because TPZ normally wouldn't change the zone for just one house, but when the Planning and Zoning Commission wants to change the zone for an area, the commission is not required to notify the owners. I think we would. It'd be cruel not to, but we would not be required to, we would be required to notify abutting property owners. Kind of going in circles here. So it depends on the application. I get calls all the time from a firm or a homeowner that's concerned that some new business went in that they didn't know about nearby. Not everything that TPZ approves requires a public hearing. And if it doesn't require a public hearing, there wouldn't be a legal notice.
Because I'm hearing what he's saying, because I also heard what the people on Alumni Road were saying, and they were being told that their attorney should have looked to see whether or not, like at the cul-de-sac at the end, or whether the property behind them is industrial. What I was hearing that man say, not with so much as what he can do on his property, is that if he wanted to sell his property, people, if they looked into what you are doing right now, might be not so anxious to buy his piece of property, or vice versa. But anyway, okay. So it's a judgment call on TPZ's part as to whether or not they would.
It depends on what the application is for, whether notice has to be sent to abutting property owners or not.
Okay, because I know like when MDC comes in the area behind me, some property owners were notified because they were abutting property owners because of wetlands and stuff like that. Even though it was in my backyard, because I don't abut that particular piece of property, I wasn't notified, and I kind of would have liked to have known as well.
Well, the Wetlands Commission, they have different rules as to who gets what abutting neighbor gets notified.
Okay. You brought up about the permits and things like that, and tag sale signs, and that's one of my pet peeves. Worse than some of the temporary signs are I don't know, would it be the police department I would talk to about the permits and the signs that go up and how much time they have to take them down? I know they just get a permit, they don't get a sign, but there's signs all over the place that just get left up, and I was wondering if that's addressed in your sign regulations at all. Just something to think about. And the Best Market property on Lowry Place, is that part of the area where there's no blinking, flashing, scrolling signs? Because as more businesses are going in there, I'm seeing signs all around. So just that. And with all due respect to anybody around here who's talking, Commissioner Payne, you aren't the only one that has said at a meeting, I talked to the town attorney, or the town attorney said this, or the town attorney said that. As someone who goes to a lot of meetings and listens to that, I'd like to see something from the town attorney or the town attorney here, or, and I've said this to the town council, because there's been times when they've asked the town attorney's opinion, and what they thought they were asking isn't what one counselor thought they were asking, wasn't the same as another counselor thought they were asking. So I hear a lot about the town attorney, and I'd like to see him either be here or some kind of backup. I don't doubt your word. I don't doubt anybody on the town council, but it seems like there's an awful lot of that going around lately. And I guess, let's see, the town attorney, the blinking, public hearings, and the open space. And this issue came up with Town Hall and the renovation in the building on Mill Pond Park. I just found it from watching a committee of 5 to a committee of 7 or 9, whatever it was, and staff members, and no disrespect once again to any staff members, nobody once ever thought to ask, is this in line with our 2020 plan? Is it allowed? I know that the 24 referral came to you, and I don't know for sure that it got delayed.
It never came to us.
But it came to the...
It never came to the town plan and zoning.
Well, it went, it maybe never physically made
but it never came here.
It landed on my desk for about an hour, and then it got yanked back by the town manager.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They said they sent it, and then it kept getting delayed. And that's nothing to do.
Questions asked for that, for the whole thing.
It was a...
circumvented the standards and the regulations. And
it was a complete debacle.
Yes, and then ended up where the public voiced their opinion and voiced it very well.
I don't want to pat myself on the back, but Mady and I probably are the ones that spurred that by putting a letter to the editor, and people weren't paying attention, other than Councilor Draco, who at several times that I was at a meeting, she was a resident and still is a resident, questioned the building on Mill Pond Park, and was told she should have come earlier to the meeting as well. Thank you, once again, because it brought the attention of what was being done to the general public, who unfortunately only watch Facebook these days, I guess, and not the regular papers. So, thank you.
Any other public participation? Okay, remarks by commissioners. Any remarks?
Long distance call, Frank.
Closing remarks by the chairman. I want to bring up the items that we talked about at the last meeting about the 2007 removal of items from the regulation by the former commission.
Yep. Specifically about self-storage, I'm still researching it.
I need some guidance from this commission how you want to proceed. I think that there's a problem when the commission takes wholesale takes the regulation, starts eliminating things out of them because there might be a small problem with one particular area, one particular application. We saw 4 or 5 different items come out in that 2007 time period, the auto regulations, and
rear lots, drive-throughs, and self-storage.
Self-storage, and I don't know if there's anything else. So we're trying to get to a handle if there's any other items that were taken out at that time. So try to get some understanding. How would you like, if we decided as a commission to relook at this, at the storage units and warehousing, would you rather have an applicant come in and make a text, make an amendment, or would you like to do it as a commission? Because I'm in an uncomfortable position because I own several pieces of PD property, and would put, not that anybody's knocking on the door to do self-storage, but to put me in a position where I'm advocating for something that could affect the piece of property, one of the piece of properties that I own, or I'm in partnership.
Chairman Aida, is there a way to compare what was taken out in 2007 to today? Well, I mean, instead of going through the regulations like we went through, is there some way of just highlighting or going through it? Self-storage areas removed in 2007, rear lots were removed and added, whatever it is.
That's what we're going to get from. We've already tackled the ones that were the worst ones.
Right.
The biggest worst one was the auto-related, the rear lots, all of them are.
The auto is not addressed yet, though.
Yeah, but
because we're waiting patiently. But we decided. I think the commission decided that they were going to wait until after the court case. So that's still on the board. But we did correct the rear lots, the drive-throughs, those two items.
Right.
But how many more were taken out? I'm just what I'm asking.
I wanted the planner to go back in the record to see what else they did at that time. They wholesalely went through the regulations and eliminated these things. And some of the reasons that the research that I did was on these storage units. They didn't want them on the Berlin Turnpike. So why didn't they stay in their discussion? Well, we're going to eliminate them from the Berlin Turnpike. Instead of that, they said we're going to eliminate them from the PD zone all over town. And what that did was that put the existing ones that are in the PDs, that put them as a nonconformity.
Right.
And that's what happens with a lot of these changes that they made. Instead of looking at the core problem and the core reason for making this change, they wholesalely took them right out. And they didn't take any consideration for the people that were already had these. And they made a lot of things in this town non-conforming. In my estimation, is non-conformity, and I think words out by some of the other people sitting here, in the non-conformity, eventually you have to eliminate that use. That's what when it ceases to be to exist, we never allow it to come back. That's how we get rid of non-conformity. Right. But we've made so many different businesses in town non-conforming because of the way that they took these things out of the regulation. They wanted certain things to happen. They didn't want certain things to be on the Berlin Turnpike, but they didn't look at like the drive-throughs. We've put that back in, and we've approved several drive-throughs since that time.
Right.
And it's good for business. Good for some of the restaurants. That's their main. That's a big part of how they do business. We just approved the Panera Bread for a drive-through.
I guess what I was looking at to see if there was some smaller items that you know.
But I'm trying to get from the planner's going to get us that information.
Thank you.
There's a whole list of it back in 2007, and then what happened was there was all kinds of changes, major changes and minor changes, and then it was all voted on all in one package. Yes. They didn't like pick and choose or bring one individual items up and vote on it. They just voted on it as a whole package, and so I think there's a lot of problems there. And I think once we get the minutes of the 2007 meetings, then it'll be evident of what those problems are.
Let's proceed that way. Let's get the information, see if there's anything else that we have to tackle. We could wait, as a commission, wait for a particular piece of property or someone to come in and ask for an amendment to the regulations to to allow storage units. We wait that way, or the commission can take it on themselves. That would be something that would be up to you, but let's find out what else is could be hanging out there that we're not aware of that was part of that package.
Right.
And I think they voted on it as part of the package because they didn't have complete, at the time, they didn't have complete support for every one of the items, but they had support, like you might have supported this piece, you might have supported this piece, so they had a consensus for the whole package, but they didn't have consensus for each individual piece, and that's how it got approved.
Right.
But it put us in the future commission, put us in a position where we're taking years to try to correct some of this stuff, and with this auto-related thing, we're still not out of the woods. We still have 50, 60 businesses that are non-conforming in the town of Newington. How that affects them, it probably doesn't affect them that much at this point. But if we don't straighten it out, at some point someone's going to come in and say, I can't get financing because the bank's saying that I'm in the zone that's not, my business is non-conforming to the zone, the way the zoning regulations read today.
Chairman, you, right now, to clarify what you needed from us, as we stand now, if a public storage facility type business comes to us and wants to,
not just public storage.
no, I know, but use that as or if there's a piece of land and they come and they say, hey, we want to put this on Mr. Planner, and he says, well, it's not zoned for that. So they can come. So in the until we figure that out as a commission, if a company or a developer comes here, how do they present to us? We say, hold on and wait, or do we do it as a
No, they come to the planner and you say, we want to do this. He says it's not in the regulation, then they go away.
Okay, I just want to make.
So it never.
But you brought up the text amendment, to meaning.
Right, because sometimes they don't go away. They say, what can I do? And I'll say, hire an attorney, prepare an amendment, bring it to the commission. I'll take the chairman's temperature, and then pay your $500 application fee and petition the commission to amend the zoning regs.
Now, and if we say that happens before we get this resolved, then when they do that text amendment, what guidelines do we have in place so that building meets if we put that back in zoning?
The onus would be on the applicant to come and research what was originally allowed before 2007, and maybe resurrect that particular.
Because you don't want it to go back,
or make amendments to it, or make changes to it, and then bring it to this. We'd have a public hearing. That's one way to handle it, is to have that. But the planner I know he gets calls on it, and he says it's not in the regulation. And a lot of them say, well, but what about, forget it, I'll go with some other town and do it. Well, that too.
So how long would it take legally to put it back in, just that one? Say if we piecemeal, say, okay, we get the list of, here's 17 different things that got pulled out. How long would it take to put it back to promote the businesses to come? Is it months, years, weeks?
Make the change, and then when he started getting inquiries, he'd say, yes, it's under this section of the regulation, and you have to comply with this, and this. You have to come in for.
But is that a long process for us to do it?
We did the drive-throughs in a matter of drive-throughs and rare lots. We did a matter of maybe 3 months. Yeah.
Okay.
You want to do them that way and not a wholesale change either. I'm looking at the back of 07 and say you want to reverse.
No. But
okay, well, let's clarify. Let's
see what else they took out when they did this wholesale raping of the regulations. I want to see what else they took out, because every once in a while I find out that there's what I thought was in the regulation is not there anymore.
I'll do that.
And I think it's incumbent upon us that to get to the bottom of it, because I don't believe that commission did justice to the town of Newington. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't do their work and say, this is how we handle this particular problem. When they had a problem, they said, when they had a problem with one specific drive-through, or a particular restaurant that wanted to come on the Berlin Turnpike, that wanted to drive through, the way that they stopped that restaurant from coming in is they removed the drive-throughs from the regulation, because they didn't want a KFC on the Berlin Turnpike with a drive-through. Those are the facts. So for one restaurant that they had a problem with, because I don't know why, but whatever reason they had for having a problem with that particular restaurant, they removed it, so that hurt everybody else. That hurt the Panera wouldn't have a drive-through, McDonald's, everybody else in the town. It affected them, and then it made all of those ones that did have a drive-through non-conforming. So when the McDonald's came in and wanted to do a modification to their drive-through, in reality, if we didn't have the regulations changed, then maybe we couldn't have let them do it. Right? So those are the ramifications of when you do zoning in that manner, instead of looking at the root problem and coming up with a solution for a specific thing, not just saying, well, we have a problem with this, just take it out of regulation. And from I'm talking to Dominic and doing some research, and what he knows, what I know, it was a whole bunch of stuff. And like I said, the way that they proceeded to get it passed was they had a little bit of support for certain things, so they put it forward as one big lump. Okay, so if we could get that, we'll talk about it again at another time. Before I close, are there any other remarks? Commissioners want to say anything else at this time? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you.